The courtroom, where it all lands. There's a specific moment in many criminal trials that attorneys on both sides recognize, even if juries don't always consciously register it. It's the moment when the jury sees the recording. Not the clean, edited version. The full recording. The 90-minute interrogation or the body cam footage from the driveway, played in a courtroom on a screen, with the subject sitting 8 feet away, watching themselves, watching the jury watch them. Jurors are not behavioral scientists. They can't reliably detect deception from body language any better than anyone else. But they are human beings, and they have spent their entire lives learning to read other human beings, learning to recognize the specific texture of someone who is managing a presentation versus someone who is simply telling the truth. The 3-second pause, played on that screen, in a quiet courtroom, is devastating not because it's scientific proof of anything. It's devastating because it feels true. Everyone in that jury box has had the experience of being asked a question that cuts too close to something they're hiding. Everyone knows what it feels like when your mind goes into calculation mode, when you have to figure out, quickly and under pressure, what the safe answer is. Everyone knows that feeling, and everyone can recognize it in someone else. The prosecutor didn't make a big speech about the 3-second pause. She played the clip. She let it sit for a moment, and then she moved on. That was enough. The fiber evidence in context. When forensic evidence is presented to a jury, its weight depends enormously on context and on how it's framed. The gray fibers, presented alone, would have been easy to dismiss. Defense counsel would have argued, correctly, that fiber transfer is common, that a 2-fiber find at an outdoor location is easily contaminated, that the state hadn't proven the fibers came from this specific hoodie. But the fibers weren't presented alone. They were presented in a sequence. First, the timeline was established, then the cell tower data, then the restaurant footage showing Marcus leaving at 8:47 p.m., not 10. Then the neighbor's camera showing him arriving home at 11:19. Then the interrogation recording, all 90 minutes of it, key sections highlighted, with the 3-second pause over the hoodie question marked with a timestamp. And then the fibers. By the time the jury heard about the fibers, they weren't evaluating an isolated piece of forensic evidence. They were seeing the final piece of a picture that had been assembled carefully, methodically, over 2 days of testimony. The fibers didn't prove Marcus had been there. The totality proved Marcus had been there. The fibers were the last brushstroke. The closing argument. The prosecutor's closing argument lasted 42 minutes. She didn't shout. She didn't use dramatic pauses for effect. She stood in front of the jury and walked through the timeline, step by step, piece by piece, the way a teacher walks through a proof. Here is what we know. Here is how we know it. Here is why it matters. She came back to the interrogation recording twice. The first time, she talked about Marcus's immediate, fluent delivery of his alibi on the driveway, the specificity that was the signature not of clear memory, but of rehearsal. The second time, she talked about the 3-second pause. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I'm not asking you to be behavioral scientists. I'm not asking you to calculate whether a 3-second pause statistically indicates deception. I'm asking you to be what you already are. People who have lived in the world long enough to know what it looks like when someone asks a question that hits too close to home." She showed the clip one more time. She let the 3 seconds play, and then she sat down. What this teaches us. The lesson of the body cam. There's been a great deal of debate about police body cam footage, when it should be used, how it should be stored, what should be made public, what rights it implicates. Those are real and important debates. But one thing that body cameras have done, unambiguously, is create an evidentiary record of first contact. That first contact, the driveway, the front door, the traffic stop, is often where the story is set, where the subject, caught off guard, before they've had time to lawyer up and prepare, reveals the shape of their thinking. Marcus's dominance display on the driveway. His immediate, fluent, over-prepared alibi. The way he answered questions before the officer had finished asking them. None of that would exist as evidence without the camera. It would be the officer's memory against Marcus's. With the camera, it's a record. And records, in courtrooms, are everything. The lesson of the interrogation. Modern interrogation, at its best, is not about breaking someone. It's not about intimidation, trickery, or psychological torture. It's about the application of patience and structure to the fundamental fragility of a sustained lie. Detective Reyes didn't break Marcus. She didn't need to. She gave him 90 minutes to run his story, and she watched it slowly, incrementally, almost imperceptibly develop hairline fractures under the pressure of patient, systematic questioning. She documented those fractures, and then she let the evidence do the rest. The lesson of the evidence. If there is one thing that true crime content often gets wrong, it's the nature of what makes evidence powerful. It's not the dramatic reveal. It's not the single smoking gun. It's the accumulation, the way multiple independent pieces of evidence, each of which could theoretically be explained away, converge on a single explanation with a force that no reasonable alternative explanation can match. The cell tower data alone, explainable. The timeline gap alone, explainable. The fiber evidence alone, challengeable. The hoodie disappearance alone, suspicious but not definitive. The 3-second pause alone, inadmissible as proof of anything. Together, a story that explains every piece of evidence without exception, that requires no coincidences, that has no holes, against which the only defense was a story that required multiple coincidences, left multiple pieces of evidence unexplained, and was delivered, from the very first moment, in the particular smooth, fluent, over-prepared tone of something that had been rehearsed. The lesson of the psychology. Marcus was not unintelligent. He was not sloppy. He had prepared. He had constructed a story with real elements, real locations, real details. What he hadn't prepared for was 90 minutes of sustained, patient, methodical questioning from someone who had done this hundreds of times and who was not trying to win an argument. She was just trying to keep him talking. And he did. That's the deepest lesson of the interrogation room. In a contest between a patient truth and an exhausted lie, the patient truth doesn't have to do anything except wait. Conclusion. The moment the lie died. Let's go back to that timestamp. 11:47 p.m. The driveway. The flashlight. The man stepping forward. He had prepared for this. He had rehearsed it. He had a story, and it was a reasonable story, and he believed, maybe genuinely believed, that it was tight enough to hold. It wasn't. Not because investigators are infallible, not because technology can see everything, not because criminals always make stupid mistakes, but because maintaining a false story is hard. It is genuinely, cognitively, exhaustingly hard, in ways that are difficult to fully appreciate from the outside. Every question is a potential mine. Every answer has to be consistent with every previous answer. Every detail has to be tracked, managed, protected. And the investigators on the other side of the table have exactly one job: to keep asking questions until the management breaks down. It always takes longer than television suggests. It is rarely as dramatic as television suggests, but it happens. The 3-second pause is the moment it happened for Marcus. Not the moment the investigation concluded. That would take months more. Not the moment he was convicted. That would take a trial. But the moment when the last circuit in the story's maintenance system flickered, just for 3 seconds, and the true weight of what he knew and what they were about to find pressed through. 3 seconds. That's all it took. If you made it to the end of this one, genuinely, thank you. This is the kind of content that takes time to research and time to watch, and your attention means everything. If you found this valuable, share it with someone who thinks true crime is just entertainment. It's that, sure, but it's also psychology, law, forensic science, and a pretty profound lesson about the mechanics of truth. See you next time.